Well met everyone and welcome to another episode of Hearthstone Tips. Some of you may have watched the first video of this series, and if you haven't, then please feel free to check it out by clicking on the link that you will be seeing on your screen right now. So in the previous video I told you more about the psychological mindset you should bring with you and how to approach the game itself mentally. This time I would like to dive into the game mechanics and help you with 5 basic ideas that you can use while actually being in the middle of a match. But I know, cut the chit-chat Kendrick and start telling us something already, will you? So off we go with tip number 1. Before actually making a play, make sure you do have a follow-up play the next turn. To be honest with you guys, I don't even know how many times I've had to remind myself of this basic rule already. It sounds more simple than it sometimes is. Let's take a look at a very common situation. You start off with a coin and a 2-mana minion, like our most favorite gnome, the Knife Juggler here, for example. Alright, all other cards in your opening hand, however, are 3 mana or higher. A lot of players will be tempted to play the Knife Juggler right away on turn 1 and coin it out on the board as soon as possible. But what then? The following turn 2 will be dependent on your card draw luck, and in the worst case scenario, you won't be able to play anything else than your hero skill if you don't draw a 2-mana card. So I would like to encourage you to use your coin wisely and not just blindly get a minion out as soon as possible. Especially rogues who can use the coin later on for a free combo effect should keep this rule in mind. Paying special attention to your follow-up plays also applies at later stages of the game, of course. For example, if you're playing as a shaman, very basic, take care of your overload mechanics, because you can't just forget about those frozen mana crystals the following turn, so adjust your play accordingly to that. Rule number 2. Remember your opponent's strong and essential cards. As most of you guys already know, there are certain cards in Hearthstone that are more stereotypical for a class. I'm talking about cards that are being used so frequently by their respective class that you almost always have to expect them. Examples for those essential cards would be the Mage's Fireball or Polymorph, the Shaman's Hex or Lightning Storm, the Paladin's Consecration, and so on and so forth. As time goes by, you will notice that certain decks keep using the same or similar cards in constructed play. Bearing in mind which cards have been played already and which one haven't, could prove to be crucial to your next play, and you can adjust your follow-up move accordingly. For example, the mage has used his first Polymorph spell relatively early on in the game and still has more than 15 cards in his deck. Now could be the time to risk playing a stronger minion, as the chances that he immediately follows up with another poly are rather slim. Let me actually show you guys what I like to do when playing constructed. Tip number 3. Sometimes it's not the best choice to spam minions on the board, especially not against hunters or mages. Hearthstone is all about minions in most games, there is no doubt about that. Having the upper hand in that regard often makes you win games. However, it is important to keep in mind that in certain situations, pumping out minions as quickly as possible might not always be the best option. Especially against hunters and other classes with strong AoE spells, it can sometimes be wiser to actually keep minions in your hand until cards like Unleash the Hounds, Flame Strike, or Lightning Storm have been played. Once you baited out those cards early and thus denied their full value potential, you're good to go. In case you're relying on aggro decks though, getting many minions out on the board is the only way to win. So this tip would not apply here, of course. Tip number 4. Trade your minions correctly. In our example, let's pretend there are 3 minions out on the board. On our side we have a single Chillwind Yeti, while our opponent has both an Amari Berserker and the Ancient Brewmaster on the board. Normally, the correct way of dealing with the situation would be to attack the weaker minion first and keep the Yeti alive. This way, he will still be able to kill the Brewmaster in the following turn. A lot of players actually get seduced by matching numbers such as the Ancient Brewmaster's health, which is 4, and the Yeti's attack, which is also 4. and will immediately trade those matching couples, so to speak, which would be a mistake in most cases. I hope that especially new players will find this piece of information useful. And last but not least, tip number 5. Play to win. Do your thing and don't be too concerned about what your opponent might have or could do. Worrying about what your opponent might have in his hand is a very natural thought process when it comes to playing card games like Hearthstone. And don't get me wrong, thinking about potential countermeasures that your opponent could pull off is not wrong at all. On the other hand, a lot of players tend to let their worries and assumptions hinder their own game plan. I have become a victim of that phenomenon myself many times, where I had a couple of beefy legendaries in my hand, for example, and I was simply too worried about my opponent, who played as a shaman and had not used any of his hexes, so he could potentially turn them into a frog. So I chose to keep those legendaries in my hand until I was so far behind that there was no chance of ever coming back. Ideally, you should have a certain strategy when creating your decks. For example, aggro decks are designed to rush their opponents down, so play aggressively no matter what, even if your opponent could potentially play big and juicy AoE spells. It is always better to make your opponent react to your own moves than vice versa. I don't want to say you should play recklessly and without second thought, but I don't want you to make the mistake of forgetting what your own strategy is about just because you were worrying too much what your opponent could potentially have in his hand. Alright, that's it for today's episode of Hearthstone Tips. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and hey, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to show me you did by hitting that like button, or perhaps even subscribe to the channel. It would be awesome to have you on board on a regular basis. So long, have a great day, and may the card gods watch over you.